All right. So let's just get started with pretty basic question. Could you tell me what your role is at Netflix and how long you've been there?
So I'm a staff site reliability engineer here at Netflix. I've been here going on touch over 5 years now.
So just to lay the foundation a bit, before adopting Incident IO, how was incident response managed at Netflix? So sort of three questions tacked on to that. So what tools or tech stack were you using? How was the response team structured? And third, how did you actually define an incident? Because we find that that varies quite a bit from organization to organization.
Yeah, that's a great question. Quite honestly, it varied across the entirety of engineering. My team, which is CORE, stands for Critical Operations Reliability Engineering, we were primarily tasked with ensuring our our members are able to do what they paid Netflix to do, which is stream and watch movies, TV shows, those sorts of things. So my team handled and still does incident response for that side of Netflix. And prior to Incident IO, we used mostly Jira. So that evolved towards the end, but by and large, for a good chunk of our history, we used Jira to declare and manage incidents. So it was a mix of Jira plus Slack for coordination. And as far as how our response team structured, over the course of my tenure at Netflix, it's varied on how many folks we have, staffed on the team.
Mhm.
But by and large, we're about 8 to 12 SREs that do everything from incident response, incident management to helping facilitate incident learnings, identifying systemic risk to availability and reliability, along with various projects that help level up reliability and availability at Netflix with a focus on the member experience when it comes to streaming content. And as far as the definition of an incident, so the definition we used was any coordinated response to a large scale impact to the member experience or something that was perhaps required a lot of engineering effort or could potentially turn into something larger if it wasn't addressed immediately. But that the emphasis was on urgency. So if my team was involved, and still to this day, if my team is involved, typically, it could be anywhere from business hours to off hours, but we're working urgently to triage, assess, mitigate, and fix it for our members.
Gotcha. And during your time there, how much has the approach to incident management changed? So, like, I guess another way to put that is like, how much has the org matured in its approach to incident response?
Yeah, so it's been quite a shift in the past year or so.
Mhm.
Um, for the first, I'd say half of my tenure, it was by and large more or less the same, and that was basically a focus on equipping our SREs with the triaging capabilities to identify systems that are contributing impact and then involving service owners to address that. But it was very much focused on, my team being the incident manage, doing incident management for engineering and as we've evolved over the past, let's say year and a half, we've looked at, how do we have service owners do that for their own domains? Incidents happen day in, day out. They don't have to impact members. They don't even have to impact a large number of systems, right? And so, our evolution looks like being hyper focused on, what we do as a company, which is bring our members joy, to expanding that definition to include like, okay, everything else that happens that might not be seen or heard by our members, but still at the end of the day have some sort of impact that should be investigated, communicated, and followed up on.
It's like really obvious to me that, like, based on our interactions working with you, you guys take incidents very seriously. Like, what's the driving force behind that posture, I guess?
Yeah. I mean, we take entertaining our members very seriously, and I think that's what it comes down to is at the end of the day, our members want to pop down on the couch, turn on Netflix, and watch their favorite show. And that I vividly remember prior to joining Netflix, I did that very thing, but we were having an outage, or Netflix at the time was having an outage, and that frustration and just actually it stuck with me, and this was 7, 8, 9 years ago, and so that's in our DNA. Is early on when we were transitioning to the cloud, we had a series of outages, and that really set the tone for how we take reliability very seriously. It's like that we cannot let that happen again to the best of our ability. And that's kind of, been our approach since.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really great segue. I'd love to if you could speak to like what the fallout of, a really bad incident is. And if you could tell a story about a particularly bad incident and how it felt to be dealing with that in that moment.
As most hardened on-calls might identify with, being woken up, let's say, very early morning page. It's 3 a.m. You get up, it's silent in the house, but you boot up your computer and you look at the graphs and everything's on the floor. And for Netflix, we have certain operational levers we can pull to run away from impact. We've presented about our abilities to evacuate a region, right? And typically that happens relatively quickly, and it's a good way to mitigate. And the incidents that are most seared in my memories are the ones where that's not available. For whatever reason, multiple regions are impacted, and that's just not something you can pull. So you're looking at a graph where there are millions of folks attempting to stream and are unable to do so. And it's just you up at 3 a.m. Deciding what to do next. And as you dig deeper, the usual suspects, so to speak, aren't panning out, and just having that sense of like, what is it, and being unsure, and then taking a deep breath and leaning in and using your resources, and then eventually figuring it out. And I've seen multiple incidents go generally that way, and those are the most memorable, just because that moment of like, this is different, this is something we might not have seen before, this is something we need to um, think outside of the box as far as mitigations go. And at the end of the day, it's all about minimizing impact and getting our members back to streaming as soon as possible.
Yeah. How scary is that? Because like if you ask me, like it must be terrifying to, using your example, waking up 3 o'clock in the morning and you're desperately trying to figure out what's going on. And it's almost like you feel the potentially millions of people just like staring at you, like, fix this now, fix this now, fix this now. Like, what is it like in that moment for you personally? Like, knowing that potentially and quite literally all eyes are on you to get these things up back and running as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I'm not sure you use the word scary.
Yeah.
I don't feel fear in the moment. Panic is also a strong word, but where there's like, okay, yeah, this is happening. And yes, this acknowledgement of the situation. And
Yeah.
then, as you said, all eyes are on me. And I think what I've learned over the years, that's actually not true, especially here, which is helps, lessen the panic. I have a
Mhm.
team behind me. I might be the only on call at 3 a.m. However, within a moment's notice, I can have any number of folks online assisting. And, that happens from time to time, depending on the severity. And so that's folks from my team who will help triage, help communicate, help summarize, basically all the, management side of the incident response. And then, as we better understand the situation, we pull more and more folks in that can help mitigate. And, we lean into the service owner model. So I don't have to be an expert in someone else's service. They have an on call that I can lean on to be an expert in their service. And so I provide kind of an overarching view of what the impact is, what might be contributing to it, and then they help do specific mitigations to specific systems. And all that to say, it takes a team. And just because I'm that incident manager doesn't mean I'm the only one that has to be the hero that day. No, I have a team that helps me with that. I do make the calls, as the incident manager, but it's a collaborative effort, and as a team we move it forward, and we get to a point where it's mitigated, and we can take a deep breath, reconvene, and then figure out what happened.
Yeah, for sure. I'd love to talk about challenges now. So, what were some of the challenges that you and your team were facing in the context of incident management and response that made you reconsider the tooling that you guys were using in the moment? So, in this case, Jira.
Yeah. Um, we'll go back to that 3M example.
Yeah.
I think, as we were onboarding new folks, it became abundantly clear. And, this is the bias of tenure kind of puts these blinders on at times. But, the 3M ergonomics of Jira for declaring and managing an incident just isn't there. And, you're blurry-eyed, you're looking at graphs, and you're focused on things that are, of immediate importance, and having to, fiddle with the UX of a tool that's not meant to manage incidents just makes it that much harder in the moment. And so our first kind of foray into incident response tooling when it comes to availability and impacting incidents was like a hand built Slack bot. And so this was a Slack UI on top of Jira to start with. And that actually got us really far, like surprisingly far, for our team specifically. But as I said earlier, like part of what we were looking for is empowering our engineers to also manage incidents. And so, we saw the potential with something that could be better, could be purpose built for incident management when it comes to availability impacting incidents. But we knew that also, um, this hand built, this small Slack bot just wasn't going to scale.
Yeah. So, when you started that evaluation process, beyond like some of the things that you just spoke to right now, like what were you guys looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we've been, for the purpose of this conversation, has been really focused on like incident response. But, as those in the reliability and availability space, it's the incident life cycle, from when the incident hits to when you're stable to when you're doing follow up on the incident, and how you feed your learnings, your findings back into the platform as a whole. And so, when we look at empowering engineering, we want the full life cycle to be addressed, not just incident response. Though like incident response, communication, all that played a big role. But we want it to be catered towards, you know, um, engineers that aren't doing this day in, day out. My team does it day in, day out. And so, we could potentially learn a tool that maybe had a little bit of a learning curve, and like that would be fine. That's the expertise our team would have. But that wouldn't scale against engineers that might manage the incident once a month and once a quarter, or where folks are, joining new teams and coming from outside the company, having to learn this as well as being experts in their domain. And so that was something that, when Molly went about looking at um, potential vendors, and, we considered what a build situation would look like internally. And we had an internal tool for incident management for security incidents. So that was all, on the table. And what she really looked for is something that had that UI, that UX, that ease of use, that someone that's not an incident commander or incident manager could step in and use it at 3 a.m., even if it's the first time, and it would just feel natural.
Yeah. You mentioned build, like obviously Netflix has some of the best engineers in the world. Why not just build something as opposed to buying?
Yeah, so when we look at the focus of my team, core critical operations reliability engineering, it's pretty vast. So we're a small team. Right now, I believe we're at about 12 folks. And, when we look at the teams that are directly, in the, we'll call it like streaming hot path, and the teams that contribute to the experience that most of our members know us for, which is, the Netflix application, streaming videos and TV shows on demand. we have our work cut out for us. That's a pretty broad area to be concerned with reliability and availability. And how do we scale that? And for when it comes to, building, that is an approach. However, it takes a bunch of investment, and when you have potentially thousands of internal customers, it takes more than just, two or three engineers, especially when you consider it needs to be as reliable as, the services we're responding to, because we're going to be using it in a time of crises. So that the leverage we get as a team, we've decided wasn't from building our own tooling. And that's something we wrestled with actually for years. And it was like, should we not? And the incident response industry was pretty immature, I'd say 2, 3, 4 years ago, when we started this less formal evaluation process. And it wasn't there, so it was like, okay, we'll just stick with Jira and maybe we'll improve the process there. But then the industry has also matured in parallel, and when we were finally ready to move on to something, there was a handful of products that did close to what we looked for, and it just didn't make sense to build it ourselves anymore, because most things, most vendors could get close, or in the case of incidentio, were almost exactly what we needed.
Yeah. I want to touch on vendors in just a second, but before we do that, let's just jump back to the evaluation process really quickly. Were there any like high priority features or capabilities that you and your team were not willing to compromise on?
I'll start with one that we thought we weren't willing to compromise on, and I alluded to it or directly spoke to it earlier, but I find it funny looking back now, right? So the single channel for incident response, and that's what we held on to for years and years and years, and we were looking at um, potentially using a third party. That was one of the must-have features, and we were gently pushed back on almost by every vendor, and Synonymous included. And I think um, that was something that we thought was like a must-have. And then when we took a step back and reevaluated the whole thing, it's like when we lay out what a purpose-built tool for incident management would bring us and what a single incident channel gives us, it was actually quite clear, after we kind of laid it all out. And, what's it all? So, Molly did a lot of the evaluation this round when it came to incident response tooling. And, her focus was that UI, UX, that ease of use, that, an engineer across Netflix could pick it up, could run with it, didn't need explicit training. Maybe within the product, it would guide them if they were managing an incident for the first time, doing incident follow-up for the first time, just fully acknowledging that, our team can't be there for every incident. So the tool should help for all the incidents we're not there for.
Yeah, for sure. So I'd love to talk about vendors now, since you mentioned them just a few seconds ago. For a company like Netflix, how much do vendor relationships and the ability or the potential to grow those factor in during the evaluation process?
It's a great question. And I don't think I can speak categorically for Netflix as a whole. The evaluation process is very much on the team, the informed captain that is looking at, vendors to solve whatever need they're trying to address. I can say that as we were looking at, what's out there for incident response, incident management, a company that's willing to evolve with us was quite important. And so this was, not necessarily really early days where they just have a nascent product.
Yeah.
We acknowledge we're a little larger when it comes to companies, um, so having something that was nascent wasn't really like a good fit right now, but someone that was, some vendor that was fairly mature, but also still growing and still evolving their product, and wanted that feedback, that perspective that we could provide when it comes to, you know, larger incident response and incident management needs. And that was, quite important to us and to Molly as she was evaluating vendors. And when it comes to relationships, if it's mutually beneficial, I think that's a great position to find yourself in, right? We'll grow with you, and I think we found that with Incident.io.
So, last question on sort of evaluation before we move on to incident IO and what life looks like now that you guys have rolled it out. During the evaluation process, like what was the point at which all of you guys sort of came together and said, okay, we've gone through the evaluation, we've looked at XYZ, but incident IO is our incident response tool of choice. What was that point or that moment?
I think it was a series of small wins, like as we were rolling it out, like a trial period, kind of looking at what it would really look like to adopt in scenario, getting in the weeds with the tooling, seeing how we could map our existing process on it, but also what would be additive that didn't exist then that Instant IO would bring. And for example, my moment would be, the introduction of the catalog and the ability to bring in Netflix specific context into the tool and things that only, you know, Netflix talks about, Netflix isms, service names, those sorts of things, and having them appear in the product. And that was for me a pivotal moment. Like that's something like a differentiator that Instant Matter provides that I haven't seen any other vendor provide, and it unlocks quite a bit of power when it comes to automation, when it comes to familiarity as an engineer. I'm seeing things in the context of Netflix that I'm used to seeing day in, day out in our internal tools. And I'm now seeing it in ostensibly a third party tool, but really it just blends in with your, with your work. And that's kind of that speaks volumes, in my mind.
Yeah. We'll talk about catalog in just a second, but before we do that, like I said, you've rolled out the platform now. You guys are users of Incident IO. I'd love if you could speak to the areas where you've seen a meaningful impact. And like, would you be able to speak to some of those areas and what they looked like sort of before and after rollout?
A big one immediately that jumps out in my mind is we talk about incidents way more across engineering. And I think that's something that, happened probably localized. And then you'd have the big one, the one that, you know, folks heard about it, at the water cooler, or they saw on the news, or they heard about from their friends, right? And those were typically ones core were involved in some way, shape, or form. But like by and large, outside of those, like it, you couldn't go to a channel and say like, oh, what are the incidents, various teams are dealing with, and we have that now, which is really cool, and that's quite a shift, and from there comes shared learnings. I can click into any incident and read up on what happened, and from there comes tracking of follow-ups, and my team who sits at like a 10,000-foot view, we can go in and say, hey, that looks very similar to this other incident seen by this entirely unrelated team, and in fact I think we could probably address it at a platform level by doing X, Y, and Z, like implementing, safety guards here, or, kind of like a system check there, those sorts of things. And so that's where the real power comes in, and at least in my mind, is that it provides leverage, leverage that can then be fed back into platform. And then communication. So I've heard from folks that have adopted Instant IO, and we're not 100% rollout at Netflix, but it's very much picking up momentum. But they have better communications with their stakeholders during an incident, and so this is streamlined. They get provided a status page. Their stakeholders that they can monitor themselves. They can subscribe through their own announcement rules. Like you name it, you can get tapped into incidents that are of interest to you. So you don't need the fire hose. You can actually filter to what's meaningful to your slice of Netflix, which might be very different than the incidents my team manages.
Yeah, for sure. So you touched on catalog just a few minutes ago. Here's your opportunity to talk about it because I know that you specifically you're a big fan of it. And I've actually heard that you guys have more entities in your catalog than any other customer of ours, which is great. So like what's the driving force behind your usage of catalog and what has it enabled for your team?
Yeah, so that's actually the first I heard that word, the largest use of catalog. That strange sense of pride with that one. Um, but yeah, yeah, absolutely. I'm not terribly surprised just because I've leaned in where it makes sense, right? And this is, back to speaking in language that makes sense to the Netflix engineer, right? And
Mhm,
providing them, you know, similar terminology, similar concepts that are seen in other internal tools, when it comes to team names and service names and those sorts of things, that's really helped, unlock better automation. So this is where, we've done really cool things where an alert fires and, we automatically create an incident with the appropriate field set using catalog that maps to our systems. And through that, we can, integrate with, internal bannering systems that, flag, developer impacting incidents and those sorts of things that kind of bridging the, Netflix specific world and, what incidentio provides.
yeah. Could you speak to like a workflow and like what that may have looked like before and after you guys have rolled out catalog?
A good one, I think, is understanding what teams are involved in an incident. So we've configured Incident.io to have um, two roles.
Mhm.
So you have the incident manager and you have the incident responder, and those are individual, you know, people or or a series of people if we're going to hand an incident off from one team member to team member. But generally, they're localized to the team, and how that rolls up through the organization. Is that's done through the power of catalogs. So the mapping of responders to teams to orgs all the way up, and so we can get a really cool bird's eye view of incidents and where they're what where they're showing up organizationally speaking, and or we can kind of zoom in and see specific teams. And then we can do the same with with services, so leveraging the catalog to pr- provide the ability to annotate an incident with the services that were involved, allow us to query by, service name and understand what services were involved in what incidents. And so without the catalog, we wouldn't be able to do that.
Yeah, yeah. That's great. Uh what has the reception been like of the platform across teams at Netflix? Like what do you think that they're valuing most from Incident IO?
Well, there's an initial wow factor, the flexibility that comes with the tooling and the ability to say, well, I would like, these incidents to be announced over here. And then these other ones announced in this other channel. And then I'd like to also send an email and also like, can you page this team, if it's a sub zero impacting, this service. And I have like mostly said yes though. Yes, that's possible. Let me show you how. Yeah, I don't need to do it like here. You can, I showed you how, go ahead and do it. And then folks just run with it. And I think that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Speaking of flexibility, like Netflix is a pretty big organization. So I can imagine that you guys need some flexibility in how you roll out a platform for incident management and response. Can you speak to how you and your team have been able to customize the platform for your specific use cases?
Yeah. So, early on, we realized this would be a shared tool across, many, many teams within engineering, potentially all, if it worked to be successful. And so we had to come up with a strategy to not isolate. So that was, kind of a principle we went set forth with, which was we don't want like to have islands of incident management. And so
Mhm.
Incidentio provides types, right? And types, in my mind, um, are differentiated by like the kinds of incidents. So I think of that as availability impacting as a kind, security impacting as a kind. And so, my team's focus is on availability and reliability. So we wanted something that, provided a holistic, view into, availability impacting incidents across engineering. So not having a silo was key. And so we came up with this concept of, impacted areas and impacted domains. And so a domain has, one or many areas, and words are hard, I admit that, but this was a way to kind of slice up what Netflix does as a company. And that goes from like, just as our members know us, the consumer product, the ability to stream, the ability to sign up, the ability to play games, and then then looking even more broader than that, and looking at like our corporate systems, our internal tooling that, powers, the business, our internal tooling that helps, get content from, the camera all the way onto the service. And a lot of these behind the scenes, um, you know, domains, we were able to come up with a set of fields that allowed us to model that. And so then that allows folks to have a single field to select when they declare an incident. And that's, what area of the business does this incident impact? And a lot of things shake out from that. Like additional fields might appear that allow them to say, it's actually this device, or, this, for example, um, internal system, things that like different sides of the company might not necessarily care about, but because they're, branched off of an impact area, like one side of the company won't see it, because they're not creating incidents for that domain. And so that it's a way of like sharing instant IO, but in a way that allows us to slice and dice. And, the needs of Netflix streaming are very different than the needs of some of our internal systems. They're equally important, but they have very different characteristics, especially when it comes to availability and reliability. And, this paradigm has allowed us to separate that, but still have that holistic view of, availability and reliability at Netflix.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's really interesting. You guys are both, like you said, you can keep things separate, but have like a holistic view of everything at the same time, which is, I think, fascinating and really great. And I'm sure saves a lot of time and overhead at the end of the day for everybody who's using the platform. Um, but one thing that I'd love to talk about quickly is like the role that Incident IO plays now and looking ahead to the future. So how confident are you that the platform will continue to serve a purpose, not just today, but as Netflix continues to grow?
Very confident. I think we see, yeah, it's kind of going back to vendor relationship and growing together and that concept. I'm in talking with, you know, various folks at Instant.io within a shared channel, pretty much daily. And it's, a very um, symbiotic relationship,
Mhm.
where, I'll flag bugs, right? And, help identify like sharp edges of the product. And then, I'll say, wouldn't it be nice if it did X, Y, and Z? And then I'll wake up the next day, being Pacific time. And in some cases it'll be implemented and rolled out in the product. And that's just amazing, and it's not just for the benefits of Netflix. And I think that's what I appreciate the most, right? It's not, I'm going to deliver exactly what you ask. It's, this kind of brain trust, the expertise that Instant IO provides and our Netflix specific perspective on incident management, and, the meeting in the middle, and then, the product folk at Instant IO understanding our perspective, but also, bringing their own. And, what ends up being delivered isn't necessarily like exactly what I suggested, or what various team members have asked, but something that serves that same purpose, and in a lot of cases unlocks more, which I think is really cool. And it speaks to evolving together.
Yeah. I I love that because yeah, like you said, it's not just like we're going to do this because you asked for it and we're going to deliver in the way that you asked. It's we're going to make sure that we deliver this in a way that not only gives you gives you use for the thing that you're specifically trying to solve for, but you're also going to be able to use it for all these other things that you may not be thinking about right now, which I think is really really cool. But like speaking about partnerships, like how much of a differentiator is the support that you get from Incident IO? And from a personal perspective, how maybe unusual is like the high quality support from a vendor? Like, have you experienced something like that before?
I haven't, and I think that makes it's a huge differentiator in my book. And I've worked with, various vendors across the years, mostly prior to Netflix, and the level of engagement I get um, on almost everything I ask is kind of, you know, it's a differentiator. Like I'm spacing on a better word, right? It's something unique I found to Instant.io, and it's kind of that collaboration, that understanding perspective, that accessibility, in a way that I feel is sustainable too. So it's not like Incident.io, like dropping everything for all of our asks, but it's something that I feel is sustainable, and it's not like we're gonna get to a point where you're like, they've adopted us enough, we're gonna move on to the next customer. And no, I think, this partnership will, continue,
Yeah,
hopefully as long as we're around, I guess. I don't know.
yeah, for sure. And just to wrap things up, what are you most excited about seeing from us next?
Very interested in how the on-call product evolves, and seeing what um, innovation can happen in that space, and what, an on-call product will look like, within the industry a year from now. I think that's something really exciting that's happening, that I can't wait to watch evolve and develop, and you know and see, what it'll look like a year from now, and in 2 years from now, and what innovation can happen there, like what pain points can be solved that I'm not even aware of, but when that feature gets delivered, I'm like, oh yeah, that's much better, than what we had.